All right, I'd like to start by telling you about the last time that I cried, which was about 5 minutes before the conference started. I'm just kidding. It was several months ago when I was strapped to a machine with a bunch of scientists watching me. So you can imagine a bunch of scientists watching you strapped to a machine, and they tried to make me cry. And how they did it is by making me watch YouTube videos. And the one that worked, the one that did it, was this one. This is a little screenshot of it. It's about a father who gets up in the morning and his two kids are having breakfast. He kisses his wife, says hi to his kids. The little kid is like, "Hi, Dad," and the teenage daughter is like, "Whatever." And he has this new camera. Turns out this is a TV commercial. He has this new camera from HP, and he takes a selfie with his daughter, kind of the one that's being a bit of a pill. And she's like, "Ugh," rolls her eyes. And then, he leaves for work, and he's like, "Bye," and she's like, "Whatever," and goes off. So during the day, she opens up her lunchbox, and in the lunchbox is the little photo that her dad took with her, a little Polaroid-looking photo, and she covers it up so that her friends don't see. And Dad comes home later that afternoon and, says hi to his son, says hi to the daughter. She's got headphones in. She ignores him. Then he goes and he walks into their room, his kid's room, and he looks around at the signs that his kids are growing up, and especially his little girl, who's now a teenager, and she has a vanity and she has makeup, and he's just like, and you can sort of see the weight of, what it's like to be this dad, and realize that, that things are changing. And he kind of sits down, feeling kind of heavy. There's bunk beds, and he sits down on the bottom bunk, which turns out is the daughter's, and he just lays down, and when he looks up, he sees on the ceiling of the bunk bed photo after photo, selfie after selfie that he's taken with her since she was a little girl, including the one from this morning that she's already put up at the top of what she sees right before she goes to sleep at night. And at this point, I started crying, and I tried to hide it, but the scientists were like, "Aha, we see on your chart here that you had an emotional reaction to this." And so this little chart, what it's measuring is the vagus nerve, which is a nerve that goes between your brain and your heart. And you get variations in the rhythm of this nerve when your brain produces a neurochemical called oxytocin, which for 100 years we thought that oxytocin just had something to do with childbirth. Your brain makes a lot of it when you're a new mother. But recently, in the last 10 years, they've learned that oxytocin, it turns out, is the chemical our brain makes when our brain wants us to empathize with someone. And during this journey of this story, there were little spikes where I felt my heart went out for this to this father. And then at the end, when sort of the big reveal, when I realized that his daughter really does love him, and he realizes that too. And even though I'm not a dad, I wanted to give this guy a hug at the end of this video. So why am I telling you this? Well, the first thing you see when you walk into the office, my office in New York City, is this quotation here on the wall. It's an ancient Native American proverb. It says, "Those who tell the stories rule the world." And we have it there for a reason. Part of what my company does is we help other companies tell stories. And the reason this is here is because I believe that there's something very fundamentally human about storytelling. And I want to connect this to the theme today with customers and building our brands and our companies by telling a couple of stories and then giving a few examples of companies we've worked with. So 2 stories that I love telling. The first one is about a fellow writer. So I started my career as a writer named Jacques, and a beggar he came across one day when he was walking along the road in France where he lived. So he came across this beggar, and for whatever reason this day, Jacques decided to stop and say hello. And he said, "How's it going?" And the beggar kind of motioned in his direction, and Jacques observed that he was blind. And he said, "Well, it's not going very well. People pass by, they don't put any money in my hat. I'm blind, and this sucks. Will you, kind sir, give me some money?" And Jacques said, "Well, I'm a poor writer, so perhaps I can actually do something else. Maybe I can rewrite your sign for you." And his sign said something simple like, "I'm blind, please help." A little advertisement. And so the blind man said, "By all means, rewrite my sign. I don't care." And so he flipped the cardboard over, wrote a new sign, and went about his day. And a few days later, Jacques was walking down the same path, came across the same blind man, and decided to ask the same question: "How's it going?" And this time, the blind man, his attitude was completely different. He said, "My hat fills up 3 times a day. People have been so kind, so generous to me. Thank you for what you wrote on my sign." And what he wrote was this. He wrote, "Spring is coming, but I won't see it." So hang on to that story. I'm going to tell you probably my favorite story in the world. It's about Ryan Gosling and me. So I don't know how many of you know Ryan Gosling, but if you don't, here he is. Beautiful man. I feel like one day I'm going to run into him and he's going to say, "You're that creep that's been talking about me." But Ryan Gosling, a few years ago, I did not care at all about Ryan Gosling. At all. Until one day I was at a conference that was pretty boring, and it was boring enough that I was scrolling through Wikipedia at random on my phone. Those things where you click on the link, you click on the next link, and I'm learning about wormholes and science and whatever. Somehow I end up on the Wikipedia page for Ryan Gosling. And I don't know how many of you know the story of Ryan Gosling, but according to Wikipedia, it goes something like this. That little Ryan Gosling, when he was a kid, he grew up in a very sad childhood. He grew up in Canada, which is not the sad part. The sad part is that his father was a traveling salesman, and they moved so often that he never made any friends. And then when he was quite young, his parents split up, and he stayed with his mom. His mom had to work, so he stayed at home alone watching television. And he loved television in part because that television was his only friend. He would go to school where he was bad at making friends because he moved so much, and the kids would bully him. And he was little, and it was hard for him to fight back. One day, things came to a head when he brought knives to school and started throwing them at the bullies because he had been watching Rambo, which was his favorite movie, which he watched while his mom was at work. And little Ryan had all sorts of problems. He didn't learn how to read until he was 12 years old. He was diagnosed with ADHD. He had all sorts of problems, but he was a cute kid, and he was very passionate about television. And so when the Mickey Mouse Club came to town, he begged his mom to let him go audition for the Mickey Mouse Club. And he was kind of a ham, and they loved him, and so they let him in. But his mom couldn't afford to move to Orlando, Florida with him, so he went by himself. And this is the craziest part of the story. He gets adopted by Justin Timberlake's mom. She becomes his legal American guardian, and he learns to read, he learns to act, he's on the Mickey Mouse Club, and then he becomes Ryan Gosling. So I read this Wikipedia entry, and suddenly I feel like I want to go see some of his movies. I'd never seen any of his movies. I never saw The Notebook. And the next time I saw a television commercial for one of his movies, it was Gangster Squad, which is the opposite of a movie that I would like to see. I saw Ryan Gosling was in it, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to go see it. And I watched it. It was great. He was the best part. So I went and I watched The Notebook. I've now paid many movie tickets worth of dollars to see Ryan, and I feel like I love the guy. I feel like I have a relationship with him. And again, he probably doesn't want to have a relationship with me. But these two stories illustrate something fundamentally important and human about stories themselves, which is that great stories build relationships, and great stories make us care. I didn't care about Ryan Gosling. Now I feel like I have a relationship with him, just because I read the Wikipedia version of his story that made him a human being to me. People didn't care about the blind man. He was one of many things they ignored when they walked along the way until they could put themselves in his shoes, understand what it's like to be him as spring is coming and he can't see it. So there's some pretty awesome research, scientific research, about this power of stories. Research that they've done in America shows that storytelling can break down barriers and foster compassion between different groups of people. When you look at social movements that have been successful, they've happened because people have come together from all different stripes, all different kinds of groups to support another group. And they do that when they learn of the stories of the brave woman who refuses to give up her bus seat. Those are the kinds of things that motivate people, inspire people to cross these barriers and help each other out. Some really cool research actually from New Zealand, where they put school children from different social classes and economic classes in story time together, elementary school kids. And they had them share stories about themselves, they had them read stories together, and basically the upshot of this study was these kids grew up to be less racist than their peers. They had more empathy and curiosity towards other people who were not like them, just because they had spent all this time sharing stories with each other when they were kids. So we're programmed for stories. This is part of the phenomenon, I guess, of what it means to be a human being. So this study that they did when they hooked me up to the brain machine, it actually was testing different kinds of stories and what are the elements of stories that generate this drug, this oxytocin, that makes us care, that builds relationships with people. And it turns out that our brains are wired for this because part of how we survived as human beings, we have these sort of fragile bodies, relatively speaking, to the tigers and everything else, but these great brains, and we figured out that if we could group up together, we could then build things and protect ourselves and hunt and feed ourselves. And so it was advantageous to build relationships with each other. So around the same time that we developed the capacity to speak and to communicate, we also developed this sort of affinity for stories, it turns out. As our brains were evolving, turning dreams into things that we could articulate, we gathered around the campfire and we took this knowledge that we'd learned when we were out on the hunt and we compacted it into stories to help people remember and understand. And neuroscientists like to say that neurons that wire together, or fire together, wire together. What that means is the more of your brain that's active when you experience something, the more your brain will remember it. And it turns out that stories are this great mechanism for doing that. Because when you hear a story, when you hear me talk about Ryan Gosling growing up as a little kid in Canada, you're imagining, you're filling in the gaps of this story, and so more of your brain is active, and probably after this session, you will remember that story more than you'll remember the contents of any one of my slides. So this was advantageous for us as humans surviving together, but it turns out that this little chemical, oxytocin, was also advantageous to us because we wanted to be able to know when someone or something came towards us, should we help it out? Is this going to be helpful for us to survive together, or should we be afraid of it? Are they going to come steal our woolly mammoth steak, or are we going to go hunt the mammoth together? And this, in part, was done, this ability to decide that we should empathize with someone, help them out when they're in trouble, was done because we learned about them, when we learned their story. We got the feeling that they were human like us. So why is this relevant to us? Well, it turns out when you look at history, the history of the businesses that have had historically the best relationships with their customers, they have typically been the businesses in the business of telling stories. We subscribed to the newspapers, the magazines. We trusted them. We have relationships with them because they give us stories, because the product was stories. And the rest of us, with our businesses, we had to pay them to put our message next to the stories that people were interested and cared about. I don't know if anyone noticed that Ryan's in there another time. And so here today, we're talking about how we can build better companies by listening to our customers. And I would posit that your brand, your company, is the sum of the stories that you tell or that other people tell about you. And customers today, because they have so much more information at their fingertips, because they can do so much more research than before, they do it. And they want to do business with companies they feel like they know. They want to do business with companies that care about the same things that they care about. All things being equal, they'll choose the company that they feel more comfortable with. And this is a product of the stories that those companies tell or that are told about them.